realized something was very, very wrong. Because whatever message she had just received scared her far more than being caught cheating. And moments later, we learned why. The second she read that text message, I knew something had changed. Up until that point, she'd looked cornered, caught, exposed. Now she looked terrified. Not embarrassed. Not guilty. Terrified. The difference was obvious. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped her phone. Jake noticed it too. So who is it? She didn't answer. Who texted you? Still nothing. I stepped forward. For the first time all night, she actually backed away from me. That scared me more than anything else. Because my wife was never afraid of confrontation. Never. If anything, she usually charged straight into it. But now she looked like someone whose entire world had just collapsed. What happened? I asked. She swallowed. Hard. Then whispered. I have to go. I stared at her. What? I have to leave. For a second, I honestly thought she was joking. The house was practically on fire, metaphorically speaking. Her affairs had been exposed. Her lies were unraveling. A strange man she was sleeping with was standing in our living room. And her solution was to leave? No. She grabbed her purse. I can't stay. Jake looked just as confused as I was. What are you talking about? Then she did something neither of us expected. She burst into tears. Not controlled tears. Not the dramatic crying she'd used during arguments. This was different. Messy. Panicked. Genuine. And before either of us could stop her, she rushed out the front door. The sound of her car starting echoed through the night. A few seconds later she was gone. Just gone. Jake and I stood there in silence. Two men who should have hated each other. Instead, we were equally confused. I never imagined I'd spend part of my night standing in my living room with my wife's affair partner trying to figure out what the hell was happening. Yet there we were. Finally, Jake broke the silence. I think we should compare notes. That sentence felt insane. But honestly, he was right. So we sat down. And for the next 2 hours, we talked. The conversation was one of the strangest experiences of my life. Because every new piece of information somehow made the situation worse. Much worse. I learned she'd been telling Jake stories about me for months. According to her, I was controlling, emotionally abusive, manipulative, possibly unfaithful. Basically every stereotype imaginable. The problem? Most of it was completely fabricated. Jake showed me messages, screenshots, conversations, evidence. Some of the stories were so detached from reality that I barely recognized myself. Apparently she'd created an entirely fictional version of our marriage. One where she was the victim. One where every bad decision she made was somehow justified. The scary part? Jake believed her. At least initially. Most people probably would have. She was convincing. Very convincing. After all, she'd fooled me for years. Then Jake shared something that changed everything. A screenshot. A photo of a bank transfer. Then another. Then another. Thousands of dollars. Transferred directly to her. Over and over. I felt sick. Because I recognized some of the dates. Those were the same weeks money had disappeared from our joint account. Meaning she wasn't just taking money from him. She was taking money from me too. At this point, I genuinely didn't know what else she could possibly have hidden. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. Normally I would have ignored it. Something told me not to. I answered. A woman's voice spoke immediately. Is this Mark? Well, call me Mark. My real name isn't important. Yes. There was a pause. Then, I think we need to talk about your wife. My blood turned to ice. I looked at Jake. He looked at me. Neither of us said a word. The woman sounded nervous, almost afraid. I asked who she was. Her answer hit like a freight train. She was the wife of another man. One I'd never heard of before. And apparently she had evidence that her husband had been involved with my wife. Another affair. Another lie. Another secret relationship. I felt physically exhausted. Like my body was shutting down from information overload. The woman explained she'd discovered messages earlier that evening. Lots of messages. Photos. Plans. Hotel reservations. The usual pattern. Apparently my wife wasn't just cheating. She was operating multiple overlapping affairs simultaneously. Some of the people involved didn't even know about each other. It was like listening to details from some bizarre crime documentary. Except it was my life. The woman asked if we could meet the next day. I agreed. After the call ended, I sat there staring at the floor. Jake looked equally stunned. Then he quietly asked, "Do you know where she went?" I realized I had no idea. None. My wife had disappeared. Her phone was going straight to voicemail. She wasn't answering texts. Nothing. Then another unexpected thing happened. Jake's phone buzzed. He looked down and immediately swore. "What?" He turned the screen toward me. It was a message from my wife. Only 3 words. "Don't trust her." That's it. No explanation. No context. Nothing. Just, don't trust her. The woman who had lied to everyone was suddenly warning us not to trust someone else. The irony was unbelievable. But before we could even discuss it, another message arrived. This one contained an address. No explanation. No words. Just an address. Then a second message. "Please come." Jake and I looked at each other. Neither of us understood what was happening anymore. But one thing was obvious. Something had happened. Something big. And somehow, against all logic, my wife's affair partner and I were about to drive across town together in the middle of the night to find out what it was. If someone had told me 24 hours earlier that I'd be driving through the city at nearly 4 in the morning with my wife's affair partner sitting in the passenger seat, I would have laughed in their face. Yet there I was, completely numb, completely exhausted, following a GPS route toward an address neither of us recognized. The entire drive felt surreal. Neither of us talked much. What exactly were we supposed to say? The normal rules of life had stopped applying hours ago. Eventually Jake broke the silence. "She never acted like this before." I kept my eyes on the road. Acted like what? Scared. That stuck with me. Because he was right. For all her flaws, my wife wasn't someone who frightened easily. She lied without hesitation. Manipulated people effortlessly. Started arguments whenever it benefited her. But fear? That was new. Very new. We reached the address around 4:20 a.m. The GPS led us to a small apartment complex on the edge of town. Nothing remarkable about it. Old building. Dim lighting. Mostly quiet. The kind of place you could pass 100 times without remembering it existed. My phone buzzed. Another message from my wife. Apartment 307. That's all it said. Jake and I exchanged a glance. Then headed inside. The elevator ride was painfully awkward. Neither of us knew what we were about to find. Part of me expected another affair partner. At that point it honestly seemed possible. Apartment 307 was at the end of a narrow hallway. The door was slightly open. Not wide open. Just enough to notice. That immediately set off alarm bells. I knocked. No answer. Knocked again. Still nothing. Then I pushed the door open. And froze. The apartment was empty. Not empty as in nobody was home. Empty as in abandoned. There was almost no furniture. No decorations. No personal belongings. Nothing. Just a couch. A folding table. A few boxes. The place looked temporary. Like someone had been using it as a hiding spot rather than a home. Jake stepped inside. "What the hell is this?" I didn't know. Then I noticed something sitting on the table. Folder. Plain brown folder. My name was written across the front. My stomach tightened. Slowly, I picked it up. Inside were documents. A lot of documents. Bank statements. Credit card records. Loan information. Account summaries. Pages and pages of financial records. At first none of it made sense. Then I started reading. And suddenly everything became very clear. My wife had been stealing from us. Not just spending recklessly. Not just hiding purchases. Stealing. For over a year. The amount wasn't small. Not even close. I won't share the exact number. But it was enough to make me physically ill. Enough to destroy savings. Enough to completely change someone's future. My hands started shaking. I sat down on the couch because I genuinely thought I might collapse. There were withdrawals I never authorized, credit cards I didn't recognize, loans I never agreed to, financial accounts I didn't even know existed. The woman I'd trusted with my life had apparently been living an entirely separate financial life behind my back. Jake looked pale. Then he found another section of the folder. His name was on it. The same thing. Transfers, payments, loans, money, lots of money. He sat down heavily. Neither of us spoke. Then I noticed an envelope attached to the back. A handwritten note. From my wife. I recognized the handwriting immediately. The note was short. Very short. It read, "If you're reading this, everything has finally fallen apart. I'm sorry. There are things you don't know. There are people looking for me. Please don't try to find me." I read it 3 times. Then a 4th. People looking for me. What did that even mean? The sentence sounded ridiculous. Like something from a movie. Yet after everything I discovered, I wasn't willing to dismiss anything anymore. Jake found another note. This one addressed to him. His face changed as he read it. "What?" He handed it to me. The note explained that she owed money. A lot of money. Not just to banks. To individuals. Private lenders. People she described as dangerous. I felt a chill run down my spine. Suddenly the panic from earlier started making sense. The fear. The running. The disappearing. The cryptic messages. Maybe this wasn't just about affairs anymore. Maybe something much bigger had been happening behind the scenes. Then my phone rang again. The same unknown woman from earlier. I answered immediately. Before I could speak, she said, "Where are you?" I told her. There was a long pause. Then she quietly replied, "Oh God. What? You found the apartment." "What apartment?" Another pause. Then, she told me she'd never let anyone find that place. My heart started pounding. "How do you know about it?" The woman hesitated. Then she said something that changed everything. Because according to her, my wife hadn't just been cheating. She hadn't just been lying. She hadn't just been stealing. For nearly 2 years, she'd been running a scam. And dozens of people had already gotten caught in it, including us. For a few seconds after the woman said the word, scam, I honestly thought she had to be mistaken. Cheating? Sure. Lying? Obviously. Manipulation? Without question. But a scam? That felt different. Bigger. More deliberate. More dangerous. I put the phone on speaker so Jake could hear. The woman introduced herself as Emily. Not her real name, but close enough. She sounded exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept in days. And after hearing her story, I understood why. According to Emily, she discovered her husband's involvement with my wife about a week earlier. At first she thought it was just another affair. Then she started digging. The deeper she looked, the worse things became. Messages, bank transfers, fake emergencies, invented crises, requests for loans, promises to repay money, promises that were apparently never kept. The pattern repeated again and again. Different people, different stories, same result. Money disappeared. My wife collected it, then moved on. I looked around the empty apartment. Suddenly it felt less like a secret hideout and more like an operations center. A place designed to keep different lives separate. Different lies separate. Different victims separate. The realization made my skin crawl. Jake sat motionless, staring at the floor. I don't think he'd fully processed everything yet. Honestly, neither had I. Emily continued. Apparently several people had already started comparing information online. Different stories, different names, different excuses. Everything pointed back to the same person. My wife. The woman I'd shared a bed with for 6 years. The woman I'd trusted more than anyone. The woman I apparently barely knew. Then Emily asked me a question. One simple question. Did she ever tell you her brother needed surgery? I frowned. What? Did she ever tell you that? My stomach dropped. Because yes, she had. About 9 months earlier. She claimed her brother needed an expensive medical procedure. Insurance problems. Unexpected costs. A family emergency. She cried while telling me. Actually cried. I remember withdrawing money from our savings account to help. A lot of money. Emily sighed. She told my husband the same story. Silence. Complete silence. Then she continued. Apparently my wife's brother never needed surgery. Never had surgery scheduled. Never had a medical emergency at all. The entire thing was fabricated. I felt physically sick. That memory hit harder than I expected. Because I remembered comforting her, holding her, telling her everything would be okay. Meanwhile, she had been acting, performing, manipulating, using my concern as a tool. The realization hurt in a way I can't properly describe. Not because of the money, because of what it said about her. Then another memory surfaced. Her father supposedly needing legal help. A friend supposedly losing their apartment. A coworker supposedly trapped in a financial disaster. All emergencies. All requiring money. All involving emotional stories. I suddenly wondered how many of them were fake. Maybe all of them. Maybe every single one. Jake rubbed his face. Then quietly said, "She told me her mother had cancer." Emily immediately responded. "She told my husband that too." The room went silent. Again. Because there wasn't anything left to say. Every story, every crisis, every tragedy, possibly fabricated, possibly weaponized. Then Jake suddenly stood up. "Wait!" He rushed toward one of the boxes near the wall. "What?" He pointed. Inside the box were dozens of folders. Dozens. Maybe more. Names written across them. Different names. Different people. Some male. Some female. Some we recognized from messages. Others completely unfamiliar. I opened one. Then another. Then another. The pattern became obvious immediately. Personal information. Financial records. Copies of conversations. Detailed notes. It looked like customer files. Or client records. Except these weren't customers. They were people. Real people. People she'd manipulated. People she'd lied to. People she'd extracted money from. The level of organization was terrifying. This wasn't random. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't a few bad decisions. This was systematic, carefully planned, carefully maintained. I felt like I was discovering evidence from a criminal investigation, not learning about my marriage. Then Jake found something else. A laptop, old, hidden inside one of the boxes. He opened it. No password, which surprised all of us. Then again, maybe she wanted us to find it. The desktop contained dozens of folders, spreadsheets, documents, notes, photos, everything neatly categorized. I stared at the screen in disbelief. One spreadsheet contained names, dates, amounts, status updates, like some horrifying business ledger. The totals made me nauseous. The amount of money involved was staggering, far beyond what either of us imagined. Then my phone buzzed. A text message. From my wife. Finally, after hours of silence. My hands shook as I opened it. The message was only one sentence long. "I'm sorry for everything." I stared at it, waiting for more. Nothing came. Then another message arrived. This one was worse. Much worse. "By the time you read this, they'll probably have found me." I looked at Jake, then at the phone, then back at the phone. My heart started hammering, because those words didn't sound like someone running away. They sounded like someone expecting something terrible to happen. And less than 30 seconds later, my phone rang. This time it wasn't Emily. It was the police. And the first thing they asked was whether I knew where my wife was. The moment I heard the police officer introduce himself, every hair on my arms stood up. I stepped away from Jake and answered a few basic questions. My name, my wife's name, how long we'd been married, whether I knew her current location. The answer to that last question was easy. I had absolutely no idea where she was. The officer sounded frustrated. Not angry, just tired. Like this wasn't the first difficult conversation he'd had that night. Then he asked something unexpected. "Have you spoken to her within the last 2 hours?" "Yes." A pause. Can you describe her emotional state? I frowned. Why? Another pause. Then, sir, we're concerned for her safety. Those words hit hard. Despite everything. Despite the affairs. Despite the lies. Despite the money. Part of me still cared. Part of me still worried. The officer wouldn't provide many details, but he confirmed they were trying to locate her. Several departments were apparently involved. That immediately made my stomach tighten. Several departments? Why? How big was this situation? Before ending the call, he gave me a number to contact if I heard from her. Then he hung up. I stood there staring at the phone. Jake looked concerned. What happened? The police are looking for her. His face went pale. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then the reality of that sentence finally settled in. The police were looking for my wife. Not because she was missing. Not because she was a witness. Because something serious was happening. Something serious enough to involve multiple departments. I felt exhausted beyond words. The apartment suddenly seemed smaller, colder, heavier. Then Jake pointed at the laptop. We should keep looking. Part of me wanted to walk away, leave everything behind, go home, pretend none of this existed. But that wasn't possible anymore. So we kept digging. And what we found over the next hour was horrifying. Not because it revealed new crimes, because it revealed who she really was. Or at least who she'd become. The laptop contained personal journals. Hundreds of pages, written over several years. I wasn't sure whether reading them was right, but after everything else, that line had already been crossed. So I opened one and started reading. The first entries were surprisingly normal. Complaints about work, stress, money problems, family drama, regular life. Then gradually the tone changed. The entries became colder, more cynical, more manipulative. She started describing people as opportunities, assets, resources, not friends, not relationships, resources. I felt sick. One entry discussed a coworker. Another discussed Jake. Another discussed me. Reading her description of our marriage was devastating. Not because she hated me. Oddly enough, she didn't. At least not according to the journal. The truth was somehow worse. She viewed me as dependable, predictable, useful, safe. The words felt like knives. Because nowhere did she describe me as a partner, or her best friend, or someone she loved. Just useful. I closed the laptop for a moment. My hands were trembling. Jake looked miserable. He'd found similar entries about himself. Apparently she categorized everyone. Ranked them. Tracked them. Evaluated them. Felt less like reading a diary and more like reading business reports. Then we found an entry from 6 months earlier. And suddenly everything changed again. Because for the first time she sounded scared. Genuinely scared. The entry mentioned someone named Victor. Neither of us recognized the name, but she clearly knew him very well. The journal described arguments, threats, debt, fear, actual fear, not manipulation, not performance, fear. The more we read, the more uncomfortable I became. Apparently Victor had loaned her money. A lot of money. Far more than Jake. Far more than anyone else. The amount was staggering. Then came the line that made my blood run cold. I can't keep up with the payments anymore. Jake read it over my shoulder. Neither of us spoke. We both understood what that meant. Then another entry. And another. The situation became clearer. My wife hadn't simply been stealing because she wanted luxury. At some point she had become trapped. At least partially. Every new lie required more money. Every debt required another debt. Every scheme required another victim. The entire thing had snowballed into something uncontrollable. Then I noticed a folder labeled insurance. I almost ignored it. Then curiosity won. Inside were documents related to life insurance. My life insurance. I froze. Jake noticed immediately. What? I couldn't answer. I simply handed him the screen. His expression changed instantly. The policy had been updated months earlier. My wife was the primary beneficiary. Nothing unusual there, except for one detail. The coverage amount had increased dramatically. Recently, very recently, a cold sensation spread through my chest, because suddenly dozens of strange conversations from the past year came flooding back. Questions she'd asked, comments she'd made, financial discussions, things I'd dismissed, things I'd never thought twice about. Now they felt different, dangerously different. I wanted to tell myself I was overreacting, that exhaustion was making me paranoid, that there had to be a reasonable explanation. Then Jake quietly pointed to another document, a document containing her notes, personal notes. One sentence was highlighted. I still remember it perfectly. Mark is worth more alive for now. For now. Those two words drained every bit of warmth from my body. I stared at the screen, unable to move, unable to think, unable to breathe properly, because for the first time all night, I wasn't wondering whether my wife had betrayed me. I was wondering whether I'd ever truly been safe around her at all. And at that exact moment, someone started pounding on the apartment door. The pounding on the apartment door was violent. Not a knock. Not someone politely announcing themselves. Pounding. The kind that immediately triggers every survival instinct you have. Jake and I froze. Neither of us moved. For a few seconds, the only sound in the room was our breathing. Then came another series of blows. Harder this time. The door frame actually rattled. Jake stood up. What do we do? I had no idea. My brain was already overloaded. Affairs, lies, money, police, the journals, the insurance documents. Now this. Whoever was outside sounded angry. Very angry. Then a voice shouted from the hallway. Open the door. Male. Deep voice. Definitely not a police officer. At least not any officer I'd ever encountered. Jake immediately looked nervous. Maybe we shouldn't answer. I agreed. The problem was that whoever stood outside clearly wasn't planning to leave. A few seconds later, another voice joined the first. 2 men. Great. Just what we needed. The first voice shouted again. We know she's in there. My stomach dropped. They were looking for my wife. Not us. My wife. Jake looked equally alarmed. Then another sentence came through the door. A sentence that made everything worse. Victor wants his money. The room went completely silent. Victor. The same name from the journal. The same name attached to massive debts. The same name she seemed genuinely afraid of. I suddenly understood why she'd panicked after receiving that text earlier. Whatever she'd gotten herself involved in wasn't just financial. It was personal. Dangerously personal. The pounding continued. I grabbed my phone and quietly dialed the number the police officer had given me earlier. To my relief, someone answered almost immediately. I explained the situation as quickly as possible. The person on the other end became very interested the moment I mentioned Victor's name. Very interested. That alone was concerning. They instructed us not to open the door. Police units were already on the way. That should have been reassuring. Instead, it somehow made me more nervous. Because if police were responding that quickly, Victor was clearly not some random lender. Meanwhile, the men outside were becoming increasingly aggressive. One of them started trying the door handle. Jake whispered, "They're going to break it down." Honestly, I thought so too. Then something unexpected happened. A phone started ringing. Not mine. Not Jake's. One of the men outside answered. The hallway suddenly became quiet. Very quiet. I couldn't hear the entire conversation. Only fragments. Yeah. They aren't here. What? Long pause. Then, are you serious? Another pause. Then complete silence. A few seconds later, footsteps hurried down the hallway. Then more footsteps. Then nothing. Gone. Just like that. Jake and I exchanged confused looks. What had happened? Why leave? What changed? We waited several minutes before approaching the door. The hallway was empty. Nobody. The men had vanished. Almost as suddenly as they'd appeared. 10 minutes later, police officers arrived. Actual police this time. Uniforms. Badges. Questions. Lots of questions. We spent the next hour explaining everything. The affairs, the apartment, the folders, the laptop, the messages. The officers photographed documents and collected evidence. One detective in particular seemed especially interested in the journals, especially the entries involving Victor. At one point he asked me something strange. "Did your wife ever mention moving away suddenly?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Starting over. New city. New life." The question caught me off guard. Because yes, she had. Several times. Over the last year she'd occasionally bring up relocating. Not seriously, just casually. Or so I'd thought. New state. New opportunities. Fresh start. At the time I assumed she was daydreaming. Now I wasn't so sure. The detective nodded slowly after hearing my answer, as if it confirmed something. Then he asked another question, one that made my stomach tighten. "Did she ever talk about faking emergencies?" I laughed bitterly. "Constantly." The detective didn't laugh. Instead, he exchanged a glance with another officer. That worried me. A lot. Because it suggested they already knew things about her. Things I didn't. Around sunrise, we finally left the apartment. The sky was beginning to brighten. The city was waking up. Meanwhile, my entire life had completely unraveled in less than 24 hours. Jake and I stood beside our cars in exhausted silence. Neither of us looked like we'd slept. Neither of us looked like we'd ever sleep again. Then my phone buzzed. A text message. Unknown number. Just one sentence. No greeting. No explanation. No signature. Only, "She isn't where you think she is." I stared at the screen. A second message arrived immediately afterward. This one included a photograph. The moment I saw it, my heart nearly stopped, because the photo had clearly been taken less than an hour earlier. And it showed my wife, very much alive, very much awake, standing beside a man I had never seen before. A man who definitely wasn't Jake, and definitely wasn't Victor, meaning there was yet another secret, another person, another lie. And judging by the expression on her face in that photograph, she knew exactly how much trouble she was in. I must have stared at that photograph for a full minute, maybe longer. Everything around me seemed to fade away. The parking lot, the police officers, the sunrise. None of it felt real anymore. All I could see was her, my wife,